gives a fuck about an Oxford comma? By Great 78.
Who gives a fuck about an Oxford comma? I've seen those English dramas too. They're cruel. So if there's any other way to spell the word, it's fine with me. With me.
Chapter 5. Creep. Draco. May 2nd, 1998. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Somehow, that specky git with the off-putting hair had done it, and using Draco's wand, no less. He still couldn't wrap his mind around it, how it had all happened. What an absolute mind-fuck, he thought. Voldemort dead, and Harry Potter alive. Had there been bets being placed in the Slytherin common room on possible outcomes of this war, that was one scenario, upon which he would have never taken the odds. The great hall had been full of exuberant celebration all around them. The little knot of Malfoys were seated near the centre of the room, an island of grim uncertainty, in a sea of happiness. Somewhere around 10 o'clock that morning, Kingsley Shacklebolt had stopped by to speak to his father. The two men had known each other years before at Hogwarts. Both Slytherins, but with very different aims in life, they had come to be on opposite sides in this war. Now, Draco could feel a shift, a tilt in the balance of power. There were no more sides because his father's side didn't exist anymore. Outsiders would have assumed that Draco would be bereft by this. After all, in school he'd had a reputation as being the biggest blood purist there was. But the truth was, he really didn't give a shit at all about that anymore. When he'd been 15, the whole Voldemort movement had seemed a bit of a lark. Growing up, his father had filled him with tales of the Dark Lord's former strength and power. How one day, perhaps, his wrongful death would be righted. Now, with the Dark Wizard back from the dead, together they would rise to great new heights, ascend into the upper echelons of the ministry, finance, all sectors, public and private. With the Dark Lord at the helm, the Malfoys would be on top. For a long time, he had swallowed these lies whole without a second thought. All through 5th year, he had laughed at Potter's misery, ridiculed those not fortunate enough to be pureblood, Slytherin, Sacred 28, members of the Inquisitorial Squad, and so on. He'd generally done and said everything he could to make a right ass of himself. He hated Dolores Umbridge as much as the next Hogwarts student, but he endeavoured to stay firmly in her good graces. That Easter in 5th year, he went home expecting everything to be the same as always. His father would be cool and calm, in control, master of his house, head of his family, leader in the community. Instead, Lucius was jumpy and paranoid. The last 2 fingers of his left hand seemed to shake badly no matter how much he tried to hide this. His mother, typically unflappable and full of grace, had withdrawn and was quiet. Narcissa's eyes were sunken and red-rimmed, the telltale sign of a person who spent more time crying than she had sleeping, as of late. But the absolute worst development waiting for him that Easter was the aunt that he'd never met before. It was a known family secret that lunacy ran deep in the Black lineage. His great-uncle Alphard had been disowned for his odd beliefs, as had his mother's loony sister, Andromeda. The infamous exploits of the conniving and mental Sirius Black had of course been splashed across the pages of the Daily Prophet for years. And Draco had had a ringside seat to Sirius's mother's dementia. Walburga, whom they'd visited a time or two in Draco's youth, had been driven positively mad in her old age. her lengthy rambles about the baubles and trinkets in her creepy house, her fitful railings against the memories of her useless son, all whilst heaping accolades on her missing, treasured son. All of that had been frightening enough to young Draco, who simply wanted to draw in his magical colouring books whilst the two women had tea. But the horrifying way that the ancient woman chewed through delicate watercress sandwiches, gnashed her yellow teeth through egg salad as though it was as tough as a well-done steak, dribbled tea down her dress so that she looked as though she'd been swimming in a muddy river. Young Draco had had nightmares for weeks after one such visit, and they'd never gone again. All of these head cases seemed like minor eccentricities when put up against the insanity of Bellatrix Lestrange. Walburga's poetic waxing over a fetid old snuff-box that had belonged to Salazar Slytherin's brother seemed like a cute little anecdote that paled in comparison to this woman's mad rantings. Bellatrix would rave to herself beginning before dawn on most mornings, waking up the entire household as she bunged about from one wing to the next. She had an odd penchant for chewing on feathers that no amount of rationale could explain. Her hair always looked as though she'd been caught out in a tornado, though he had to admit the look rather suited her personality. But the way she treated Draco, his father, and even her own sister, revealed her true level of depraved insanity. No one was above her malicious anger. He'd never experienced the Cruciatus curse before meeting her, but the little taster he received from Bellatrix for taking the last slice of coconut cream cake after dinner one night had been enough for him. That Easter, he got a glimpse of what life would be if the Dark Lord were to gain complete power. It was a bitter realization, to put it mildly. However, when the time came to choose sides, there was no real choice for Draco Malfoy. His father had made that clear, because Lucius had pledged their allegiance. It was either take the mark or accept death. It was only the knowledge that his death would destroy his mother that made Draco choose the mark. His mother had screamed herself hoarse when Lucius told her that Draco must eventually do this. But no amount of screaming would change his father's mind, and no amount of reluctance on Draco's part would change his fate. That summer, when he returned home to only his mother and crazed aunt, he accepted the dark mark with a stoicism befitting a Malfoy. Lucius was imprisoned in Azkaban, and Draco must take his place. There was no escape. Now, on May 2nd, nearly 2 years later, the winds of change had blown in a hurricane, and Draco could sense freedom from the prison he'd locked himself in. He wouldn't need to be an inept Death Eater any longer. He could perhaps forge a new path. The Malfoy family left Hogwarts slightly hopeful after the battle that took place there that day. When it mattered, his mother had helped Potter out in the Forbidden Forest, Draco learned from her, as they sat in the Great Hall. The family did not fight in the final skirmish in which Bellatrix and Voldemort were killed. His wand had defeated the Dark Lord. Perhaps there was a chance for the Malfoys, after all. Only one thing stood in Draco's way: his Wizengamot trial, which even he had to admit would almost certainly find him guilty. The evidence was quite damning. It was right there on his arm, for Salazar's sake. 3 weeks later, the Owl of Doom arrived, bearing 3 summons. They would need to appear at the Ministry of Magic for trials and sentencing before the Wizengamot in a week's time. Not very long to prepare a proper defense, his father noted pedantically. Draco looked at Lucius as though he were mental. What kind of defense could they mount? The Dark Lord had lived in their house, had been served by their elves, and had forced them to do his bidding. He'd literally marked them as his own. What was there to say? June 5th, 1998. The Ministry of Magic, London, England. His mother's trial was first, and only lasted about 15 minutes. Draco wasn't present, as he was being held in a cell further down the corridor, but his barrister brought him the news of her innocent verdict. He was relieved to hear it. It was about the best birthday present he likely hoped to get this day. Lucius's trial was next, and a few hours later Draco was equally shocked to hear of the lenience shown to his father compared to the life sentences that every other Death Eater had received. Only 50 years in Azkaban seemed far too kind to the man who had so willingly signed up his entire family in service to the Dark Lord. Perhaps the name of Malfoy still stood for something, Draco mused. His trial was set to start after lunch, and he sat nervously picking at the sad little sandwich and stale crisps brought to him. Looking at it, Draco knew it was a feast compared to what he could expect in Azkaban. Still, his stomach was in knots, and he could only force down a few bites before he asked that it be taken away. The door to the holding room opened, and Theodore Nott stepped in. Draco's eyebrows shot up in surprise to see the young man. He had not seen him since before the Christmas halls of their 6th year at Hogwarts. Theo had abruptly left school in December of 1996, presumably for a family visit like everyone else. But in January he had not returned, leaving the school without telling anyone ahead of time. Word eventually came that he was hiding with his mother's family in Lithuania. Draco and Theo had been quite close in their youth, but had grown apart over the course of their later years spent at school. As Draco became more and more enmeshed with the Inquisitorial Squad in 5th year, Theo started pulling away, and Draco had let him. There was no ill will, no words exchanged. He knew the other boy to be sensitive, and that Theo's mother was a half-blood. He knew better than to expect Theo to fall in line with this new world order of blood purity above all others. "Draco, mate, it's good to see you. Happiest birthday wishes. You look well." The lie fell from Theo's lips easily. Draco huffed a laugh. His robes hung on his lank frame, and his eyes were sunken, with blue circles under them that stubbornly had not gone away despite the turn of events of the last month. He knew exactly what he looked like a man who had not slept properly in nearly a year. Having the Dark Lord and his creepy snake as house-guests would do that to a person. "Theo, what are you doing here?" "Came to see you, mate. Find out what your plans are now." "Plans?" Draco scoffed. "As far as I know, I have no plans beyond fervently hoping to celebrate my 68th birthday as a free man. My father received only 50 years. Hopefully whatever good will that was extended to him will be offered to me as well." Theo pulled out a chair, sitting and interlacing his fingers on the table in front of him. He leaned forward, eagerly. "What if I told you there might be a way that you can celebrate your 18th tonight, as a free man?" Draco raised one eyebrow in weary disbelief. "I'd say you're barking. There's no chance that the Wizengamot is going to let me go free from this." Theo heaved a sigh. There might be a way." "How?" "Do you know who my godfather is?" the dark-haired young man asked him abruptly. Draco shrugged, drawing a blank at the sudden change in topic. Truthfully, he had no idea. Theo went on. "My godfather and my mother were quite close in school, and you know my mother always had a soft spot for you. She called in a favour with him, and Kingsley agreed to ask around to see if anyone would speak on your behalf." Draco's jaw fell open. "Kingsley Shacklebolt is your godfather?" Theo smirked. "Don't look so shocked. You know my mother's a half-blood. Do you really think that anyone in my family outside of my father was going to follow Voldemort's way of thinking? When Evangeline divorced Tiberius 12 years ago, she took all the intelligence in the marriage with her." Draco shook his head, as though to clear it from the flood of thoughts that crowded his brain. "You're right. I'm fairly certain, after spending a bit of time in your father's presence this last year, there isn't much going on upstairs. No offence, mate." Theo laughed. "None taken." "But who in the wizarding world would consider speaking on my behalf? Kingsley doesn't know me, and I'm fairly certain that Umbridge's name is mud round here. The only professor I was close to at Hogwarts is dead. Who's left?" Theo's grin widened. "What if I told you the Chosen One is sitting in that courtroom, down the corridor, right now, waiting to speak in your defense?" Draco was speechless for a second, before answering with a disbelieving huff. "I'd say you were mad. What other dumb ideas have you got?" "Not dumb. I just spoke with him. Kingsley got in touch with him a couple of days ago, and he agreed to speak on your behalf because you didn't identify them at your house when they were captured. What's more, he brought her with him." Theo smirked at him knowingly, as though dangling an enticing morsel over the cage of a starving dragon. Inside his chest, Draco felt his heart stop. There was no need for Theo to elaborate upon who the her was. The only question in his mind was, what in the absolute hell was Hermione Granger doing here, at his trial? His relationship with the swotty Gryffindor witch could be described as complicated, at the absolute best. From an outsider's perspective, he and Hermione Granger were polar opposites. He was a pureblood who relied upon his parents' name to propel him to success. She was a muggle-born nobody. He was naturally gifted at magic, having been brought up with the stuff, and he passed most of his classes with at least an exceeds expectations, despite hardly cracking a book. She had only learned of the existence of witchcraft at the age of 11, yet was fastidious about revision and seemed to swallow and regurgitate spell-books like it was a life's calling. His hair was practically perfect in every way. Hers sometimes looked as though it had lost a fight with her insolent, half-Kneasel familiar. He had followers. She had friends. All right, he admitted to himself. She won that one, he supposed. Complete opposites, to be sure. That was why, for most of their years together at Hogwarts, when he felt something leap in his chest, or swoop low in his belly when Hermione Granger was around, he dismissed it. He chalked it up to the absolute repugnance he felt for her friends, her house, and everything she held dear. But that day in Malfoy Manor, he watched in fear as she huddled on his drawing-room floor. She was piteous and helpless, but her eyes still burned quite defiantly, and it had taken every fibre in his being to stop himself from running to her, from grabbing her up and apparating away with her. The instinct to protect her had paralyzed him, shocking and stupefying his brain to the point where his senses were dulled, his reactions slowed. It was little wonder that Potter was able to wrestle the wands from his grip as they escaped. Draco's mind was so confuzzled at that moment that he would have gladly given Potter the wands, plus the keys to his Gringotts vault, had Potter only stopped to explain to him what the hell was going on inside Draco's own brain. The memories of that day had both haunted him and sustained him for months after. Yes, it had been an awful, terrifying experience. But to suddenly have everything he thought he knew about his feelings towards this witch turned on its head, it cleaved into his thoughts almost constantly. When he saw her that day in May, in the room of requirement, his heart pounded fiercely. His blood pulsed in his ears. When Vince had aimed a killing curse in her direction, it had been Draco who had knocked the wizard down, redirecting the curse, unseen by the Gryffindors. But Vince had felt it, had suddenly known that he was vastly outnumbered and outbacked. The doltish boy, who had looked to Draco for guidance and advice all their lives, now looked at him as though he were a pariah. Those moments when her life had been threatened, and he'd wanted to protect her to the ends of the earth, they had bewildered him. When forced to confront his feelings about the witch, he felt like a stranger in his own body. He realized at some point that not only was he not repulsed by her, but that Hermione Granger was exactly what he'd been missing in his life. Something he'd wanted, did not even know he was missing until the knowledge descended upon him like a trebuchet full of boulders. She was fierce and cunning and brave. She was smart and loyal. Draco had always been told that he deserved the best, and though he really did not believe that he deserved her, he could not help it. He wanted her very badly. But that day, in the dingy holding cell deep in the cellars of the Ministry of Magic, Theodore Nott knew none of that. As far as he was concerned, Draco still thought of Hermione Granger the way he had in their 4th year, the last time that the two wizards had spoken of her. The single conversation between himself and Theodore about Granger had taken place in the hours after Yule Ball in 1994, almost 4 years before. "Granger was looking good tonight, yeah? Had no idea she was hiding those under those frumpy jumpers, did you?" Theo leered, his cheeks ruddy from one too many fire whiskies. "Yeah, didn't think she had it in her to look like that. If she wasn't such a stuck-up swat, I'd be in those knickers, for sure," Draco said. He clamped his lips suddenly, a fresh heat spreading up his neck onto his face. He was a lightweight when it came to alcohol. He'd only tasted a bit of champagne at his parents' New Year's gala last year, and had drunk 2 fire whiskies that had knocked him on his ass at the Slytherin house party after the first tournament task in November. Now, his mouth was moving far faster than his brain, due to the copious amounts of alcohol he'd snuck at the ball, and he seemed unable to stop it. Tomorrow was likely to be hell on earth. Theo did not seem overly fussed by Draco's unlikely confession, however. He only raised a brow. "Even with her being a muggle-born and all?" Draco had smiled, his head lolling back as the room spun slightly. "It's not her blood I'd be after, mate." Theo had chuckled. "Well, I suppose it really doesn't matter, one way or the other. There's literally no chance that Granger would ever let the likes of you or me anywhere near her knickers." Draco had been silent, head thrown back as the room spun slightly, knowing that there was nothing he could say to refute that. They'd lapsed into silence, broken only by the crackle of the dying fire in the common room fireplace. Within a minute, Draco had passed out. When he awoke several hours later, the fire had died away and Theo had gone to bed. The conversation had been forgotten, or so he thought. Now, in the holding cell near the Wizengamot courtrooms, looking at the smarmy curl of Theo's lip, it was clear that the other Slytherin remembered the entire discussion perfectly. "Who knows, mate? This might be your opportunity. Show a little contrition. Maybe she'll show you something in return." Theo waggled his brows suggestively. "Fat chance," was all Draco could muster. Theo stood to go. "Well, good luck out there. Wish me luck as well. Once everything is done, I'm going to see if Granger would like to get a drink together. Ruminate on the good old days. Maybe make a few new, good memories, if you know what I mean." With a wink, Theo was out the door. Draco clenched his teeth. Theo may not have joined up with the Death Eaters, but he was still the same old Nott. Theo was certain that no Malfoy would ever lower himself to be with a mudblood. not in any real sense. In the other Slytherin's mind, Draco would only be looking to use Granger, to get what he wanted from her. Freedom from a life spent in Azkaban, and nothing more. Still, the man had a point. Draco was truly sorry for everything that had happened, and if her presence was anything to go by, she might possibly be willing to hear him out. He had to try. Besides, she was here at his trial, where apparently her best friend was planning to speak on his behalf. Did she also come to help him? He had to find out. Draco checked his watch. There was a bit less than 1 hour until they reconvened. Hesitantly, because he was fairly sure this was against the Ministry's rules, he quietly called out, "Pym." The little elf appeared, in his finest suit, clearly planning to attend his master's trial. "Pym, I need a favour from you." "Gladly, Master Draco." With only 10 minutes until his trial was set to begin, there was a soft knock at the holding room door. Granger opened it, her searching copper eyes finding his, her expression difficult to read. There was sympathy, yes, but also, was it defiance? "What do you need, Malfoy?" His heart stuttered just a little to hear his surname on her lips. She was dressed in a lovely burgundy red suit, and her hair was pulled to one side, as untamed and wild as ever. He wished to coil a bit of it around one finger, and flexed his hands to relieve the longing ache in them. The light in her bright copper eyes burned warm in content today, a stark contrast to the blazing fright in them that day in the manor. That alone made his heart leap. "Granger, hello. Would you care to sit?" he asked cordially. She did not move. In rushed but pained words, his apology came tumbling out. "I only wish to apologize to you for my words and actions in the past, and especially for that day in my home. I did not want you captured, and I was scared. I thought we were all about to die." An image leapt to the front of his mind, that of his crazed aunt holding a knife to the young witch's throat, drawing a fine line of blood. His voice grew quiet, and she had to lean in to hear his next words. He could detect the faintest hint of gardenia when she did so, and he inhaled again, slowly, savouring the moment, preserving it in his mind. 50 years. He might need to survive on this memory alone. For 50 long years, he thought. The last time he'd been this close to her, her open palm was slapping him across the face. This was a vast improvement, a moment in time that he would need to keep in his mind, to sustain himself. "The moment I realized you'd been captured, you and Potter, I thought everything was lost. I wanted so badly." At this, he broke off. He could not confess everything he'd felt that day. For one thing, she might think him disingenuous, lying to her in an effort to save his own skin. For another, there was simply no way that Hermione Granger felt anything close to that in return towards him. It was folly for him to even consider the notion. "I wanted so badly for that not to be true. I no longer wanted to fight, but I could not see a way out. I'm very glad you were able to escape, and I'm sorry I didn't do more to help you." For a long while, after he ceased speaking, she said nothing. His silver eyes came up to meet hers then, and he was unable to read her guarded expression. She appeared to be calculating, turning his words over in her mind like a stubborn rune translation that she could not quite crack. Finally, she asked, "Was that your elf?" They discussed his elf, Pym, then, of all topics. It felt surreal to him. She seemed surprised that he'd freed the elf, but if she had only known how much Pym meant to him, she would not have questioned it. Pym was like a father, a friend, and a brother to him all together at once. Draco could not force Pym to subject himself to that life, and the elf deserved the choice to stay or go. At long last she gave him the smallest of smiles. It wasn't the radiant grin she'd bestowed upon Potter that day in the Great Hall after Voldemort fell. It wasn't the shy smile she'd given Krum that night of the Yule Ball, when she'd looked so spectacular. And it wasn't the triumphant smirk she'd worn in classes over the years, when she'd bested them all in whatever assignment had been given. No, Draco decided. This was a smile just for him. It was his alone, and he drank it in greedily, staring intently at her, as if to memorize every detail of it. He had a feeling that, in the dark recess of Azkaban, he would need this image in his mind to keep his heart beating. "I'll see you back in there," was all she said. "Thanks, Granger, for coming here. See you." At the soft click of the door behind her as she left, his forehead dropped to the table in exhaustion and relief. She had accepted his apology, and it was more than he deserved. It was with the greatest shock, then, that he watched as she took the witness stand in his defense. He could not meet her eyes, but felt his face burn and his eyes prickle with tears. This witch was putting her reputation on the line for him, and he had no idea why she felt that he deserved that respect. But he would do whatever he could to earn her respect, going forwards. 5 years of probation, the first year of which would be at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, repeating the final year of education that had been cut short. He could hardly believe his ears. Theo clapped his shoulder in victory as the Wizengamot filed out of courtroom 6. The press and the rest of the gallery were a chattering buzz of activity, and his mother was a mess of joyous tears. But his eyes were fixed upon the head of brown curls, quietly disappearing out of the spectators' entrance. Theo's eyes followed his gaze, then turned back to him with a knowing smirk. "You and Granger, huh? Finally going to make good on that idea you had after Yule Ball, you sly dog." The dark-haired wizard laughed then, and Draco gave him a feeble smile and nod. "You'll come back to school, too, then? Help me out in that regard?" Draco asked him with a pretense of jocularity. "I suppose I have nothing better to do," Theo agreed, with a tilt of his head and a leering grin. "Between the two of us, Granger won't know what hit her. Who knows? When you're done with her, she might be interested in spreading that golden goodness around a little. I wouldn't mind a taste." Draco took a quick breath and tamped down the quick flare of jealousy that erupted in his chest. He managed a tight smile. "I suppose we'll find out," was all he could say. Thank you for listening to Who Gives a Fuck About an Oxford Comma by Great78. If you enjoyed the story and would like to listen to more, please follow me on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts by searching for Silver and Copper. Or you can find me under Great78 on Archive of Our Own.